Welcome to episode 78 of the Grassroots Guy podcast with me, your host, Harry Purdy. Today, I'm delighted to welcome another guest from the Alliance Circle, a man who helps emotional eaters break the binge cycle to end yo-yo dieting, and an all-round legend. Welcome to the podcast, Mr. Sam Gibson.
Thank you, Harry. Wow, I love that. I love that introduction. You've done your research, mate.
Done my research, always. Do you know what? Like I say this every time now. When I first started the podcast, I used to make sure I had 2 pages of notes. Now, I like to think that the podcast can go in any format of conversation. So let's see what happens, my man.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what your audience and your listeners will benefit from. It's just free-flowing conversation, because too scripted and people they get turned off by it. I think they just want to hear people having a meaningful conversation. So yeah, I just like to let it flow, mate. So take it away.
100%. Mate, you are labelled as an emotional eating coach, and that's class. There's no way, though, that you've landed into that niche by accident. So how long have you been coaching, and what has meant that you've fallen into that niche of being an emotional eating coach?
Okay, great question. So yeah, it wasn't an accident that I fell into that niche. So I've been working in the fitness industry as a coach, PT, starting off just helping my mates out with diet plans, as I'm sure that's something that you've done as well on your journey. When I was about 17 years old, I was always the fitness guy. I was the guy that was in shape. I was the guy in the PE changing rooms at school. The teachers were like, "You've been lifting weights? What you've been doing?" Because I was always like fairly jacked for my size even earlier on. So that kind of got me into a path of, bodybuilding. I've done some photo shoots and things like that. I've competed in bodybuilding before. So in like 2012, I was the guy in my local gym at like 17-year-old, where all the young lads would come towards me. So I've somewhat been coaching at a very low level since then, and I've been helping people with diet plans and PT and things like that. But I was working in the fitness industry from about 2014 to about 20, working in a gym specifically. But I was just kicking around, just, selling diet plans like everyone does back in the day, trying to scrape it by, getting PT clients, working on a gym desk, but all throughout that time, I was actually hiding my own disordered eating patterns, so I was in shape because I do hours and hours of cardio a day. I'll admit I was taking steroids, things like that all bodybuilders do. So I was in incredible shape. But every single night, or not every night, but a lot of nights, if I was anxious, if I was feeling depressed, and I can talk about some of the things that I was struggling with, my go-to would just be binge on thousands of calories. Then the next day I'd wake up feeling depressed. I'd stick my fingers down my throat. I'd do all the kind of things that disordered eating people do. And then I'd block it out my mind and I'd pretend it didn't happen. And I'd go back to the gym and everything's fine. So this was kind of controlling my life from about 2015 to about 2017, 18. And that's when I kind of reached the point when I was like, yeah, I need to get a handle on this. And that's when I discovered Paul, obviously our mutual coach, Paul Morton, working on personal development. I started doing a lot of just studying authors like Jordan Peterson and people like that, just understanding why did I feel the way I do. And I realized that my disordered eating was actually a reflection of depression and anxiety. So once I handled the depression and anxiety, the disordered eating went away. But back to the fitness industry stuff, it was 2020 when I realized, hang on, I can actually use my story of overcoming disordered eating habits, and I can kind of get away from the PT game, because you'll know yourself, it's very samey. It's the same things over. You're trying to compete with a lot of people who are doing the same things. It's really hard to stand out as an individual in that game unless you've got something special. And I believe that was my something special. So I guess since 2020, I kind of pivoted from the traditional PT and I went down the emotional eating coaching route. So does that answer your question?
Incredible answer. Yeah. Leaves me with many avenues to take us down with that. I want to go back to the start of what you said, though. You were in the gym getting like jacked, as you say, being picked out in the changing room as the lad that's already training from 17 years old. So where do you think that stemmed from?
I don't know. I mean, I can even take it back earlier. I was around about 14 when the PE teacher literally looked at it when I was getting changed, questionable behavior, by the way, but we'll not go there. And he was like, you been training? Like, I was like, what? You've been lifting weights? And I was like, not really. I do a few push-ups, things like that. He's like, you're jacked. He's like, absolutely jacked. And he started making a joke about it, saying like, oh, this is, by the way, I'm from like Newcastle, South Shields, so it's a bit of a working class town, and some of the teachers are mental. So the teacher started saying like, oh, you could take everyone in here in a fight. And I remember thinking like, what's he talking about, the fuck? But then that kind of planted the seed, think, wow, if people think I'm in shape already, what would do if I started exercising properly? So I guess since then, 14 years old, I've been training with weights, and by 17, people are already accusing us of like, oh, you've been taking steroids. I'll be like, no, I didn't start taking steroids until I was about 22, something like that. Yeah. So I've always been like that. I think it's just genetics, Harry, to be honest. Like, I'm only 5'8", so I'm quite compact, but I always have been, you know, fairly jacked, if you like. I'm not that big now because I don't weight train anymore, but yeah.
Yeah. So ending up in the gym at 17, and as you admitted to, but like, let's just say what it was, mate, you ended up with the symptoms or the feelings of anxiety and depression, which led you to being bulimic, is what it sounds like, my friend.
Technically was, yes. Without me admitting it, it was probably years later. I think I like emotionally gaslit myself. Like, that's what men do. Like, I don't know if you've ever struggled with like mental health. I'm not sure of your background, but you can block things out of your mind, and your mind has such a powerful way of just completely being in denial. I think it's like a form of cognitive dissonance. So it wasn't until years later I'm like, I used to stick my fingers down my throat and throw up. Like, what the hell was I doing? I remember making a concoction of like bathroom products and drinking it to spur on being sick after a binge. And I blocked it out of my mind, Harry. It was until years later that I'm like, shit, I actually did that. What the fuck? But obviously I bottled it up, and I wouldn't, I convinced myself it wasn't a problem. That's how deep rooted it was. It was really messed up time in my life. Yeah.
So again, mate, like, without asking the same question, but about something completely different, where did those mental health issues stem from? Like, because that is some position to get yourself in. I was speaking to my physio today, actually, just recovering from a little injury, but it was around the root of, it's interesting, I think, in our line of work, that everybody who offers help to others, i.e., your area is emotional eating, you've suffered that. So I say suffered that, you've experienced that and dealt with it to a really healthy extent now that you've confronted your emotions. And now it's led you to offer assistance, and you're helping thousands of other people, which like means you can look back on it and say thank you, which is obviously important. But at the time it was stemmed from something that I guess you can say thank you for now. But what were those things, mate, that was making you feel those ways?
Yeah, if I'm gonna psychoanalyze myself and look back at the 17, 18, 19, 20, maybe young version of me, I would guess it was like really, really low self-esteem, you know. So I guess there was a few, I hate using this word traumas because I've never been abused, I've never been anything like that. But I guess everyone's version of trauma was essentially just the worst thing that they've ever experienced. You know, that's my version of it. So I'll not get into some details, but let's just say there was some childhood stuff that happened, some acts of violence, some, you know, humiliation, some embarrassment. And I think that planted a seed in a very young version of my mind. And as I got to become an older teenager and a young man in my 20s, I've got very insecure. But because I had these physical attributes, that became my identity. So the mask that I'd put on to hide these insecurities was, I'm the big bodybuilder, I'm the tough guy, everyone looks up to me, and you know, that kind of stuff. So I kind of put this mask on, but really I was still that wounded little boy, you know, from childhood and a few things that I experienced. And I never really confronted that, you know. So things that you don't confront, it just builds and builds and builds. You can project what you want to the world, but if you don't look deep within yourself at what these voids are, they will, you know, they will come out in dark ways, you know. And I don't know how well versed you are in psychotherapy and psychological stuff, but I am now, and I've studied a lot of Carl Jung. I don't know if you know who he is. One of Sigmund Freud's counterparts in the psychotherapist world in the 20th century, and he calls it the integration of the shadow. You know, so this integration of the shadow means that you've got to accept all of your traumas, you've got to stare them down in the face, and you've got to look to integrate them in your life. If you just bottle them up like what I was doing, they will manifest in the form of addictions, violence, you know, repressed urges. You can manifest sexual things, addictions. So I've not only struggled with food, I've struggled with alcohol, drugs, sex, even making money to a certain extent. So I would use these coping mechanisms to hide from this insecurities and these emotional voids of not feeling good enough. And then I put this mask on, and I'd use like materialistic things to paint over the cracks. So I guess simplifying it, that's probably what I was doing. And it wasn't until I was in my early mid-20s that I kind of realized that I was maybe an addict, very impulsive. Psychotherapist actually told me that I probably had undiagnosed ADHD as well, which didn't help. I'm very scatty, I'm very up and down. You know, my childhood was like that, you know, very high level, you know, high emotions, everything's great. And then panic and fear and violence would happen. It was a big crazy growing up where I grew up, you know what I mean? So very up and down. So I kind of that planted the scene for my emotions as an adult, if you like. And I would use things to cope, including alcohol, drugs, and then getting into the whole bodybuilding thing, that was like pouring fuel to the fire, because you know that yourself, what it's like when you're in that industry, comparing yourself to other people. There's always people better than you, obsessing over how you look, to literally to the point of neuroticism, you know, with what's going in my mouth and how I look. It was just petrol on the fire in my mind, you know, so it had to explode at some point. And I guess that's what the anxiety and the depression was. That was my feedback. That was my psyche waking me up to the fact that something had to change, because this was a path to nowhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man, it's incredible, isn't it? What we put ourselves through for perceived pleasure. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
guess steroids for you was another bit of petrol for the flame of that quick fix pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, one of the most well-known fitness guys out there now, James Smith, is open about his use of anabolic steroids. I assume that was what you were doing as well. What were your experiences of that, and like how did that almost paper over the cracks, as if I'm to use your words?
Well, I used my body as an extension of this mask that I was putting onto the world, that I had it together, that I was fine, that I was confident, that I was this, that I was that. But really, I wasn't. You know, so when I decided I wanted to compete in bodybuilding, I realized, well, everyone else takes steroids, so I better as well. So I didn't take steroids until later on. You know, I certainly was in that fitness industry for a while and doing bodybuilding training and diet. And I was the typical, you know, bro bodybuilder. And I would be very strict with my nutrition, would probably factor that in with all of these emotional binges, because I'd binge on all the foods that I cut out. But I kind of had that going for years. Steroids was the last thing for me. So I think I took steroids pretty consistently for about 3 years. And I guess it was just an extension of that insecurity. Like, if I'm going to put myself out there and become a bodybuilder, which back in 2017, 18, that's what I wanted to be. You know, I had this idea in my head that I'd win a bodybuilding show and then I'd get a job. I was unemployed at the time. I'd get a supplement contract with My Protein or something, and that would change my life. That would save us from the anxiety and the lack of purpose that I felt. So I guess I did it as a knee-jerk reaction to want to be the best in that industry. But I'll be honest, I don't think steroids, if they are used appropriately, I don't think they're that dangerous. But I do think they're dangerous for people with mental health issues, because they become a crutch, and that's what's happened. That's what happened to me. Yeah, so it definitely had more mental impacts on me than physical. Didn't really get physical side effects because I researched how to use them in a safe and appropriate way and took the countermeasures, so I didn't get any negative side effects. But I certainly got a lot of emotional side effects, because I think they enhance what you already are. You know, you might have heard like James Smith say this, like, if you're an arsehole already, you'll take steroids, you'll just be a bigger arsehole. You know what I mean? So I guess that had that kind of effect on me. I was already insecure. They made me even more insecure. That's kind of what I would say.
Do you look back at yourself then and think that you, like, I'm just asking this because I think it's a great question. Do you look back at yourself now and think that you were an asshole in those times then?
Oh, mate, 100%. Yeah, I wasn't a very nice person. Yeah, wasn't a very nice person. I was very judgmental. I was very critical. I didn't treat people well. I certainly didn't treat my girlfriend well at the time, or any other girls I went with. Yeah, I wasn't very nice at all. Quite a hair trigger temper, quite not violent in the physical sense, but I'd be violent in my nature, you know, slam doors and smash stuff up. And if I didn't get my way, yeah, just like a petulant child on steroids, basically. That was me.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So I've wrote down here that even through all of those things, self-esteem, low self-esteem, uh, use of steroids, you still had that. You said in one of your answers then that you didn't really have a purpose, but I, from listening to you, think you did have a purpose, but you didn't know that's what it was at the time. You were still offering assistance to other people. So was that another way of taking your mind off of your own insecurities as well? Or did you somehow subconsciously take some pleasure from assisting like the younger lads around you at that time?
So this is what happened, mate. When I kind of went in on the bodybuilding, I decided I wanted to compete. I actually stopped doing PT. I
Right.
stopped helping people because
you.
I was so tunnel visioned. You know, this is one of my ADHD traits coming out again. I'll put all my eggs in one basket and I'll go all in on it. But because I did that, I isolated myself from my friends. I isolated myself from any opportunities. I remember some lady reaching out who knew, was like, Sam, are you still doing the personal training? And I was so anxious and like depressed at the time because I was just battling this eating disorder and generally the will to live at that point in my life, and trying to make it through mentally just to do this bodybuilding show, that I turned down work because I was scared of being around people and things. So I actually lost my purpose in that time that I was bodybuilding. You know, so that was it for me, Harry. It was waking up every day going, the only thing I've got in my life is my own body. in my gym in this bodybuilding show, which is not really making us happy, which is actually giving us an eating disorder. And I think deep down, I knew that, but I couldn't admit it, you know, so I projected it. That's why I was an arsehole. I projected it onto the world. You know, I see memories come on my Facebook now, you know, when you write the status, and then years later, I'll be like, this is what you posted 5 years ago. Some of the things I was posting, mate, I'm like, what the fuck? Was no one messaging me saying, Sam, are you all right? Like, seriously, some of the things I was posting, I scare myself. You know, there's months of my life I'm looking back and I cannot remember. I was like a zombie, you know? So, yeah, I guess I projected that onto the world and blamed other people, but really it was because I was without purpose. I completely let myself go. I was disconnected. I didn't have a job. I was making no money. I was paying for all my supplements and food and steroids on credit cards, or I was, you know, doing illicit things to make money and pay for it and get myself in debt with dealers. That was the life I had. So I was completely disconnected and completely, you know, broken behind the scenes, but I wouldn't admit it to myself. Yeah.
What 3 traits now have you gained that you believe make you 10 times the person that you were back then?
Ooh, what a good question. I guess self-awareness. I would class myself as a very self-aware person. And actually by doing the work on myself, that actually allowed me to become, you know, without blowing my own trumpet, a really good coach, in my opinion. Because I'm able to spot people's problems because I'm like, I see that in me. I did that. So because I become so self-aware myself and I took responsibility, I guess that's another trait, responsibility for my own shit and stop blaming it on the world and look at my own life and say, well, what do I need to change? So self-awareness, responsibility, and I guess the ability to take action, you know, that probably comes from, you know, Paul Mort's trainings over the years. But when I discovered him in 19, I was still kind of figuring it together. I was back on the PT. I was making money. I was doing all right. But when I first joined Paul's program, that's when I really deep dived into the personal development stuff. And, you know, just saying like action's the only answer and learning about values and Dr. John Demartini's stuff. And then asking deep questions about, well, what do I like to do? What do I want to do with my life and living by my highest values? You know, so I guess the ability to take action, put my feelings to the side temporarily, because I still feel anxious and depressed from time to time, but that doesn't stop me from taking the actions that I know I should. That's linked to my purpose and my values. So the ability to take actions, regardless of how I feel, high level self-awareness and ability to call myself out on my own shit without blaming other people, and responsibility, I guess.
Taking action and
Yeah.
self-awareness.
Yeah. High level responsibility. Like, you know, I'll have my 5 minute moan and blame my girlfriend for things she pisses us off with and my parents. But after that 5 minute moan, I'm like, right, it's on me. What do I need to do? And I think if to be successful, whether you're a man, a woman, whether you're a PT or a business owner, whether you're a mum or a dad, teacher, it doesn't matter. Whatever you're in, whatever industry you're in, or even you just want to improve your own mental health, you have to have the ability to say, right, I'm feeling triggered, but for now, I'm just going to put my feelings slightly to the side. They're important. I'm not going to invalidate them, but action has to come first. What action do I have to take to move me forward? Because the reason I was getting depressed and anxious was because I wasn't taking action. I was just letting everything in my mind build. And the more you avoid things that scare you, the more anxiety you get in return. You know, I was literally having panic attacks. That's why I was binging, to turn off these panic attacks, because I was avoiding my fears, you know. So yeah, the ability to take action regardless of how I feel, I think that's probably been the most powerful trait I've been able to forge over the last 5 years or so on this journey that I've been on.
Yeah, it's insane, mate. How did panic attacks feel for you?
They would manifest in the form of, for me, physically, heart palpitations. I took myself to the hospital twice thinking I was having a heart attack, genuinely thinking I was having a heart attack. And it was just literally my own body playing tricks on me because I was so scared of dealing with my own shit, basically. You know, admitting insecurity, admitting failures, you know, maybe some trauma that I hadn't worked through as well, just, you know, physically manifesting in my body. So yeah, panic attacks for me would be like rapid breathing. I could feel like I had to get out. I remember leaving the house at like 4 o'clock. I remember the day, mate. This is my Paul Mort Cliff story. This is my version of it. You know, was the I left my house at 4 a.m. one day, 23rd of March 2018. I remember the day, and I had a panic attack and I couldn't get to sleep, and I was just literally driving myself nuts. And in a moment of madness, I left the house at like 4 a.m. Just left the house, walking around the streets, and I was like, yeah, when this bus comes past, because I knew the first bus was about 5:30, I'm chucking myself under it. And that was just a fleeting moment of madness. Yeah, obviously didn't go through with it. But I remember just having a complete breakdown, you know, that day. Don't know if you've ever seen The Shawshank Redemption. You seen that film?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, at the end when he escapes and he's on his knees and he's just looking up at the sky. I was doing that, but I wasn't like I'm free. I was like, fucking, I can't live like this anymore. Literally middle of the night. That was my like crazy moment, and I'll never forget it. You know, it gives us chills talking about it because I was literally on my hands and knees when I was having these thoughts. It's pitch black, it's pissing down, it's 4 a.m, and I'm just fucking screaming at the sky. And that was like, I had a complete breakdown, to be honest. I did. But after that, I felt a bit calmer because I knew something. After I had that moment of madness, I was like, I can't continue like this. So I stopped the bodybuilding, stopped taking the steroids. I started putting myself out there on social media again because I realized I've got this purpose and I want to help people. I'm skint. I've got no money. I need a purpose. And that was the thing that kickstarted it for me, to be honest. But that was my moment. That was my breakdown moment. Yeah.
Yeah, it's insane, mate. And what a turnaround. One thing that it's really interesting because I was a guest on somebody's podcast yesterday and they said, what is the biggest impact or what impact has Paul Mort had on your life? And I took a little while to answer because obviously he offers many different things. And the one thing I said as number one was he has made me take responsibility. And when you psychoanalyze people for me, it would be on like a real basic level, but for you, a little bit deeper. When you speak to people about their problems, not all the time, but 90% of the time, there are actionable things that they can take responsibility on to fix these problems. Why do you think that it almost takes us to get to breaking point to find out that is what's going on? We're not taking responsibility.
Yeah. So I think I kind of know the answer to that. I hope I articulate it in the right way. So yeah, the thing that you said about Paul teaching you how to just take action and take responsibility, that was the thing for me. I think I seen a video, like a Facebook walk and talk from him before I was even a client of him. So I'm from the same town as him. So I used to see Paul in the same gym as me. Wow. I thought he was a guy who worked at the jiu-jitsu studio because that's where I actually train now. I do kickboxing, I don't do jiu-jitsu, but I seen him used to walk around in his gi and I thought he must be an instructor. And then I realized, I think James Smith, who I was following, gave him a shout out. I was like, who the fuck's that dude? I was like, I know him. I know who he is. And I looked and I was like, hey, who's this Paul? I didn't even know his name. I just used to see him in the gym for months, going back and forward, going to jiu-jitsu with his gi on, you know. So it wasn't them. That's when I started following early 19, you know, a couple of months after my breakdown, if you like. And that's, I think I heard him say a video like, don't believe everything you think or something along those lines. And just hearing him say, your thoughts aren't real. They're not real. Like just figments of your mind, just throwing information at you. How you respond to your thoughts is what dictates like the quality of your mental health. And I was like, wow, I've just automatically believed every thought I've ever had. And it was in that moment I realized that your mind can just completely play tricks on you. And if you believe it, it'll be reality. He just said, question your thoughts. And then I joined these programs and studied them and watched every single ounce of material he was putting out there for free. And just the ability to respond to your thoughts, question your thoughts, take action. You know, that was it for me. So the second part of your question, why do people wait until they get rock bottom? Well, I think it's out of fear. And I think until you felt real fear, like my version of it, Paul Mort's version of it on that cliff, when you're like, right, this is it. I'm either going to die here or I'm going to fight. I'm either going to roll over or I'm going to win. I'm going to sink or swim. I think you have to be pushed to the point of almost death until you realize that's not what I want. I'm actually more scared of that than doing the work. So I think until people become more scared of the consequences of not doing the work, they'll continue to procrastinate. You know, so you might have similar things like with your coaching clients on building leverage and delving deeper. You know, when people say, for an example, oh, I want to lose weight. Well, why? Oh, because I don't like my body. I'm like, yeah, that's not it. I'm like, why do you want to lose weight? And when you go deeper and deeper and deeper, it's because they're not having sex with a partner and their marriage is on the rocks and they're about to completely lose everything they've ever worked for because the inability to work on their body. That is an example of what going deep could be. And until you're faced with real life consequences of an inability to get a handle on your actions, people will continue to procrastinate. So I think it's down to the fact that people aren't aware enough of the consequences, that they let their life get so bad until they can't avoid the consequences anymore, until it's right there. That's when it'll change. So it's almost like you have to reach rock bottom before you start to climb again.
Yeah, brilliant answer, mate. Do you think as well that there's too much distraction for people as well to take full responsibility?
Yeah, I do, mate. I think, you know, I've got my theories on society's programming now, but I think we are bombarded by information. We are bombarded by comfort. We're bombarded by entertainment. It's easier to bury your head in the sand and just stay in denial. than it is to actually take responsibility. Because someone can be massively depressed, you know, back home, listening to, you know, maybe this podcast, you know, watching Netflix, scroll on social media, they can be very, very unhappy. But as long as they've got low-level distractions to numb themselves, it'll stop them from ever going to them deep places in their mind until they can't anymore. You know, that day is coming for everyone, I believe. So you'll distract yourself. I distracted myself with sex, with bodybuilding, with, you know, steroids, with whatever I was doing at the time. I distract myself with all of that until I couldn't get away from these physical demons anymore, if you like, the physical symptoms of panic attacks and anxiety, until they were knocking on my door in reality. I couldn't avoid them anymore. But if those didn't happen, I'd probably be still doing the same shit now, Harry, to be honest. So I think until you're faced with real life consequences that you can't ignore, I think people will continue to just distract themselves with whatever they can. And that could be booze, it could be Netflix, it could be coke, women, sex, spending money. You know, so many people just distract themselves with their job. You know, they might be successful in their job, but they're hiding a lot of dark stuff behind the scenes. You know, when they put their head on the pillow at night, you can't lie to yourself. You know what's up at the end of the day when you're by yourself alone with your own thoughts. You can't distract yourself from that. It's only a matter of time before those dark thoughts, you know, come to the surface and kick your ass, so to speak.
So what does Sam Gibson do to look after his own mind and body now then?
I think this is another extension of Paul. You know, Paul obviously shares us a lot of mentors that he studied from. Dr. John Demartini, mate, he changed my life in learning about the values. I don't know if you read his book, The Values Factor. But understanding what your values are and how you have to have a purpose to your life. And if you align your actions and how you live day to day with your higher level purpose, that'll negate any mental illness for the most part. Because 9 times out of 10, most people who are experiencing mental health, they don't have a diagnosed condition or a brain chemistry issue or some kind of genetic illness. Some people do, some. Most people are just disconnected from a purpose and their values. So for me, I'll still get somewhat depressed and disconnected, if you like, if I stop exercising, I stop living by my values, I stop getting out in nature, if I don't show up and deliver content and value to my audience, because that's what I believe my deep purpose is. So basically, it's about those actions. So I've got to show up on social media. I've got to write an email. I've got to create content. I've got to deliver for my clients. If I know I've done that, then I know I've lent into my purpose and I've ticked those boxes. And then acts of self-care for me, that would be my kickboxing. I still weight train a little bit, you know, taking my partner out, going on a date night. It's my personal hobbies and self-care. You know, and I have had a few wobbles the past few years, and that's always when work's took over, or I've had family problems that I've been distracted by. And when my exercise and my hobbies went out the window, that's when I start feeling depressed again. You know, I'm too self-aware now to know that it's not, you know, depression. It's just, in the mainstream term, it's just I'm disconnected from my hobbies and my values. And I get a little bit low, I get a little bit jaded, things like that. But I know it's because I'm not doing the things that I know work for me. You know, I say this to my clients all the time when they're struggling. I'm like, right, tell me right now, what are you knowingly not doing that you know if you would do would lift your mood, you know, because you wouldn't be feeling like this if you were doing those things. Oh, yeah, well, I haven't been in the gym in a week. You know, oh, yeah, I haven't been doing this. You know, I haven't been doing that I said I was going to do. I'm like, yeah, there you go. Take action on those things. So I can't avoid these consequences anymore. I'm too self-aware to be able to avoid that. If I don't do those things, I'll get depressed, and I know I will. So I just do those things as much as I can, regardless, you know. But I'm human. I still fuck up from time to time. That's pretty much what I do to manage my stuff. And that keeps me mentally on track. If I'm living by my purpose, leaning in my highest value, which I believe to be the best emotional eating coach I can be, but then I've also got my acts of self-care and my personal hobbies, I'm all right. I'm fine.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because probably, let's say 5 years ago for you, you'd have had that wobble and you'd have labeled it as something completely different. And it would have been the end of what you were doing probably for 2-3 months before you realized that you needed to get back on the bike now. Similarly for me as well, is when you have those days where you wake up and you don't feel 100%, it's almost like a little reminder, like almost like your ego needs a little bit of a, right, son, you've got more to do. There's more to do here. You're like coasting a little bit potentially is how I feel like. So double down. Like, what else can I do to make me feel better? Is that the same for you?
100%, mate. You know, and I've brought it up a few times, but I haven't been officially diagnosed with it, but I definitely think I'm like ADD or ADHD. Like, I've always been like that. And I remember being 5 years old in school and just like kicking off and shouting at the teachers because I didn't want to do maths and things like that. I've just always hated things, and think people with ADHD, they have to have a flexible but still a structured routine. I know if I don't get up when that first alarm happens at 6 a.m. and go and do something for myself, whether I go to a coffee shop and write some content, go and do some journaling, go for a walk in nature. I have to start my day like that. If I snooze my alarm, it affects the rest of my day like really badly. So there's things that I have to do. And if I notice I'm wobbling, it's because I'm getting too comfortable. I've made enough money this month. I don't need to get up and do a live video. I'll stay in bed, and things like that will happen. I'm already in good shape. I've been training for years. You can pretty much see it outlined in my abs, regardless of what I eat and what I do. I don't need to exercise. I'll take the week off. Before you know it, I'm like, fucking hell, I'm anxious again. I'm depressed. I'm feeling a bit shit. And I know straight away it's because I've lost that discipline. So things for me is just getting up the crack of dawn. Like my favorite thing to do, go in a coffee shop from 6 till 8 a.m. before I even do my client work, before I even think about what I'm doing for the day. I stick Jordan Peterson on, Tony Robbins in my ear, put audiobooks, Paul Mort stuff, whatever it is that I'm learning. And I'll sit in a coffee shop and I'll just listen and I'll just write and I'll think and I'll let it all wash over us. And then I'll start work. If I don't start my day like that, like I struggle, so I've got this set rigid routine with an element of flexibility. I only work 3.5 days a week now. I've got 2.5 full free days, and then weekend I do other stuff, but Wednesday, Thursdays, I don't do anything. I don't work. My content's banked for the week. I'll actually go to a coffee shop and read and write and plan things. I'll work on my business rather than like in my business. So I've got to have my structured routine. Otherwise I'll lose the plot. Even as self-aware and as, as knowledgeable as I am now on mindset and my own mental health, if I don't have a structure and I allow a little bit of a chink in that armor for a little bit, I get too comfortable and I procrastinate. Within a couple of weeks, Harry, I'm back to where I was 5 years ago. Seriously, I'm back to where I was then. So I know for me, structure is everything.
Insane, mate. I'm going to ask you a little niche question, actually, because I don't think it's talked about enough, especially for lads our age group. You've mentioned walks in nature quite a lot, well, at least 2 or 3 times during the podcast. And for me, you don't hear enough male, I'll use the word coach, influencers talking about the impact that nature can have on you on a mindful level, let's say. So how much of an impact does it have on you, mate?
A big one. I've done a lot of studies on evolutionary psychology and evolutionary science as well. So there's a great book called The Ape That Understood the Universe. It's written by Steve Williams, I think.
Yeah.
And it explains the basics. But from that book, when I listened about human psychology and how we are programmed as animals, because we forget how we're fucking animals. We're standing on a podcast now on Zoom with all this technology and all this shit. But we're animals. We'll forget that. We are fucking animals. And animals have needs. Humans aren't supposed to be indoors all the time. There's a reason when you go for a walk in nature and you see the sea lapping on the sand, or you go on holiday and you get vitamin D, or you're outdoors doing some exercise, you feel good after it because your body's programmed to release happy, feel-good chemicals like oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin when you're in nature. And also when it comes to that evolution, like there's massive differences between men and women. Men have to be outside hunting an animal. Yeah, now we don't have to hunt an animal per se. I don't say I do that, but we need to be out amongst it, exploring in nature, walking around things, because that's how we are hardwired, mate. That's how we are hardwired. We have to be outdoors exploring, because men are explorers by nature. Like, look at what we've achieved as civilizations over the last hundreds of thousands of years, from being cavemen in a hut to what we are now. That happened because men got up off of their backsides and went and explored. I think there's this gene inside of our brain, especially as men. We cannot turn that off. Men need to have that warrior gene unlocked. We need to have that animal to hunt, so to speak. Now, it doesn't need to be physical. That can be metaphorical for anything, just a goal, a journey to follow, something to focus on, a purpose. But I think men need that. And I also think men need to let that inner caveman come out and get outside as much as he can and go and explore and do things outdoors. Because I think we're warriors by nature and we've lost that as a society.
Insane answer, mate. Something as well, when I got therapy a while back, my therapist used to tell me off because I used to bite my nails, and luckily they're in good position now. But I said, why do you think I do that? And she said, well, Harry, if you lock a bear or a monkey in a cage for a long time, you watch how quickly it will start taking bits of fur off itself and start chewing on it. And genuinely, I believe that is such a great analogy to how we can become. Because I don't know about you, Sam, but I know, because I've done a lot like yourself, a lot of work on myself, a lot. And I know that I am one of the biggest problem solvers you'll ever come across. Even if I don't want to be solving a problem, I am in some format. And that is because, well, who knows why? Like, that's just
I don't think we can turn it off.
Yeah.
I don't think we can turn it off, Harry. I think men who aren't leaning into that role of being a high-level problem solver are men that are secretly depressed and living a quiet life of desperation. All men are problem solvers. Our whole like all this stuff we've created, society, money, all this bollocks, it's all fluff that we've just kind of created. If the apocalypse, if the big red button happened now and we went back to the Stone Age, we would revert back to our original programming, which is men get out and hunt. Yeah. Women are the nurturers, but men get out and do the physical stuff to solve the problems. That's how men are really logical. And that's how, I don't know if you're in a relationship or you got misses.
No.
No. Have you had a missus in the past?
Yeah.
So this is an example I'm talking about, how men are hardwired. When your girlfriend or women or even a woman in your family, they're venting, they're emotional, and you're like, right, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And be like, what are you talking about? Just support us. What are you on about? Because they're emotional by nature, because they're emotional creatures, because they're supposed to be nurturing, very emotionally available, higher level intuition. Men are problem solvers. We just want to solve problems. And that I noticed that in my own relationship, and I need to stop trying to solve my partner's problems because it'll cause issues. Sometimes I just need to listen. But that urge to go, it's so hard, I can't turn it off. And I've realized that I just need to accept that. Rather than fight it, I just need to say, yeah, I'm a problem solver. I'm a high level problem solver because I'm a man, and that's how I'm hardwired. And I just need to be careful about projecting that on people who necessarily don't need their problem solved. But I can't turn off my innate ability to want to solve problems. I don't think all men can. That's why men have got to have creative goals that move them forward, because we've got to constantly be problem solving. Men who don't have problems to solve feel useless instead of useful, and men who feel useless will feel like they don't have a purpose. When you don't have a purpose, that's when you're opening the door for anxiety and depression. So I think, yeah, your therapist's definitely right about that. If you're not solving problems, or if an animal is in a position where they're trapped, trapped in a life that they don't want. We're not in a cage, but some of us feel trapped in a life we don't want. We might as well be in a cage. That's when these anxious tics and behaviors and addictions will come out, because we're not solving problems.
So Sam, you must have coached thousands of clients in the past. What are the common comparisons and similarities that you see with your clients that you take on straight away regards to emotional eating?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm a mind reader, but I've actually prepared these notes and I've got them in here, right? So this is the process that I call the 7 causes of emotional disconnection. And I take my clients through this to determine what their voids are in their life. Yeah. So the common themes that I've found, and I've got this directly from some authors and some mentors who I've studied, and Johan Hari talks about this a lot in his book, Lost Connections, and I've translated that massively to emotional eaters. So number 1, lack of fulfillment from daily job. You'll know yourself, Harry, with your clients, if they hate their job, they genuinely hate it and they dread it and they're not challenged by it, that's huge in terms of the impact on mental health. I'm sorry, but I don't think you can have a good life if you hate your job. I just don't think you can.
Question. Mark Manson is obviously one of the most famous authors of all time. Now, this is an opinion question, really, but Paul will tell you to live an unstoppable life. Don't do anything you don't fucking literally love doing. Mark, on the other hand, says there's a balance between being in an okay job and being in from being in a shit job, let's just say, and being in the middle with one that you can tolerate, because that's just life. And then there's obviously the mindset on being unstoppable, doing things that fucking empower you, right at this top end here. Where do you sit?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the middle, and I think if Paul expanded on that, he'd probably add some stuff to it, because Paul certainly had to do a lot of things he hated to get where he was. So I think there is an element of, suck it up, buttercup to start with, and saying, you know what, I'm going to do it and I'm going to suffer, because I think that builds resilience. Yeah. But I think as a 40-year-old man, maybe, who's got 3 children, who's trying to pay the bills, I don't think that's a good move. I think when you're young, when you're young and you want to learn the world and you want to build some resilience, I think doing something you hate for a little bit builds character. And that's where I'd lean towards Mark Manson. I just think it's not a long-term strategy, So I think for Paul to be in that position where it's like, yeah, you need to be unstoppable, you don't need to do any of those things you hate. But I think you have to do things you hate to get to the point when you're like, yeah, I'm no longer going to do things I hate. Does that make sense?
Classmate, yeah. That was just a little caveat on the topic we're on. So over to you, bro. Number 2.
Yeah, lack of meaningful hobbies. I talked about this before. Lack of meaningful hobbies and interests, or values, as Dr. John DeMartini calls them. I think if you don't have meaningful values, how do you express yourself as an individual? You're just your job, or you're just your mum, or you're just a mum, or you're just dad. And I think when people have these masks, these identities as, that's who I am, I'm just a mum, I'm just a worker bee, I'm just a slave to my job, that's when people lose themselves. You hear people say that all the time. I need to find myself. How do you think you do that? You express yourself as an individual. You get creative with your own individual uniqueness, and you just don't give. I think Mark Manson talks about that. You just don't give a shit. You just explore who you are, and you just do it without judgment anyway. You know, even if you get judged, just do it. You know, that's expressing yourself as an individual. Number three, lack of intimate connections to other people. You know, and again, that comes back to that way we are hardwired as humans. Humans have to be around other humans. If we feel isolated and alone, what that represents as far as survival terms is abandonment from the tribe. And a caveman or a cave woman, if you like, who was abandoned from the tribe 100,000 years ago would have been picked off by predators. They wouldn't have had the safety of the group. So even though we don't have saber-toothed tigers chasing us down now, in modern terms, if we feel isolated and alone, we'll feel vulnerable to something, to attack. Yeah. And that's when anxiety, depression, I'm not good enough and I'm not going to fit in and I'm not going to be loved. That might be in the form of I'll never find the one, I'll never get married, I'll never have children, I'll never get the job that I want. So humans have to have connections with other people. And intimacy just means safety. So we need safe connections with other people, because you can be around loads of people and still feel the loneliest man in the world. You know, you need to be around people who make you feel safe and connected. So that's disconnection number three. Then we'll get a little bit deeper. Limiting beliefs due to previous traumas. You know, I've got to be honest, when I started becoming an emotional eating coach, I had to go down a rabbit hole as far as some of the traumas that people went through. And that's why I've actually studied a lot of, you know, Freudian concepts, Carl Jung, the deeper level psychology stuff, because I had to, Harry, because some clients were coming to me who'd been sexually abused from a young age and who'd had severe childhood traumas and things like that. And it just totally opened my mind to the things that people go through and the conditions that they can develop as a result of these traumas. You know, so, you know, an example of a limiting belief due to traumas, you know, let's say you've got your average guy, you know, Dave, right, gets married to his childhood sweetheart, you know, then he finds out his wife cheats on him, you know, so now he has the limiting belief of all women are the same, don't trust anyone, you know, reject any advances, I'm just going to do my thing. That's a limiting belief as an effect of some very real trauma that he's had, yeah, that he's unfortunately went through, but he's painted the world with this limiting belief and believed it to be true. So people don't understand what limiting beliefs they have, normally as a result of trauma, and people don't even realize how, even though that traumatic event, it's not hurting them anymore, they've created a belief about themselves and the world as a direct result of that trauma that's impacting every single day of their life, because those limiting beliefs become their identity. So many people I work with in fat loss terms or weight loss terms or emotional eating terms, it could be like, well, I've always been overweight. It's just who I am. You know, I'll never be able to change this. I've given up. It's like, well, really? You know, what trauma have you went through for you to believe that to be true? I know that it's just a limiting belief from some kind of trauma, whether they're willing to admit it or not. So I have to unpick a little bit. It could be childhood. It could be a marriage breakdown. It could be a mundane event that they've put to the back of their mind. But that's become a repressed thought. That's created this identity as they've gone on, you know, so dealing with some traumas is an element of it as well. Yeah, and we mentioned it before, the lack of connection to nature, that's a big one. People are office workers, they're slumped over their desk or on social media all day, they're not getting outside and they're not creating feel-good chemicals, that's a big one. And then the last two is about disconnection from societal status. Like humans are always comparing and contrasting themselves with other people. And again, kind of tied into the limiting beliefs. If we perceive people as better than us, you know, they're richer than me, they're skinnier than me, they've got a nicer car than me, you know, they're more intelligent than me, they're prettier than me, they're sexier than me. We'll make ourselves feel small and we inflate others, and that'll fracture our ego. So that'll cause further limiting beliefs. So sometimes our limiting beliefs about society, comparing yourself to other people, social media has made this a million times worse, by the way, as we can all understand, but that creates emotional voids. So some clients that I've had, maybe you've had, the reason that they're struggling with their weight loss or whatever it is right now could be the fact that they're just comparing themselves to fitness models or, you know, Kate Moss size 0 and they're not. It's like, well, that's not you. You're thinking that's the standard when it's not. You've got your perception of society completely wrong and you're making yourself feel small, smaller than you need to be, because you're comparing yourself to unrealistic standards and expectations. And the last one is that lack of purpose that we talked about. If you genuinely feel like, is this my life? Is this all I've got? This is it. You will be depressed by default. And normally that is a side effect of not having a meaningful goal that's in the future. You have to have a direction to go towards. So many people who we work with, I work with, you work with, Harry, they've got nothing going on in their life. And a simple question I asked them, I literally asked it on a call just before this podcast. I said to a client of mine, I says, right, tell me what you're excited about in your life right now. And they paused for a second and they were like, nothing. And I went, that's why you're emotionally eating. You've got nothing to look forward to. Can you see? They're like, yeah, I get it. That's why, so that's the 7 causes of disconnection that I've kind of tweaked from Johann Hari and some Freudian, Jungian concepts of psychology and kind of catered it towards emotional eaters. So that's the 7 areas of disconnect that I see people who struggle with their eating habits and all forms of addiction, I may add. It always comes down to one of those 7 things. All 7 might be prevalent, or just one might be prevalent, but it's normally 1 or 2 are stand out and the others are kind of in the background. When I was depressed, Harry, I was displaying every single one of them, every one.
I think that's incredible, mate. And it's incredible knowledge for the listeners to hear those things, because there's going to be somebody, even if it's one person, mate, that listens to this today, when they listen to this podcast, and they go like, they may even hear the penny drop, bang, there it is, like lack of purpose. And I don't know about you, mate, but that lack of purpose thing, when I look back at those times when I was going and paying, like, don't get me wrong, my therapist was incredible at the time, but she opened up other doors for me in regards to stop knowing what I knew subconsciously what I needed. But the point of the matter was, we've all been in that place, it seems, within this game of shit, no purpose.
That's it, mate. Yeah, I think that's men's main problem. I think women can have more emotional distractions that they don't necessarily need as a deeper purpose as a man. I mean, I'll never be a woman, so I can't experience it from that perspective. But from just the studying that I've done, it's really important for men to have a purpose. It's important for women to have a purpose as well. But for a man who feels he doesn't have a purpose, that's really dangerous. Really dangerous. That can manifest in the form of, like, think of all the horrible things that's happened in society. Most of it's done by violent men. Why do you think they do that? Probably because they didn't uncover their emotional voids and they've allowed it to manifest until it's become, evil, basically, because it's come out in evil ways, in violent ways. And all of them did. If they had a purpose, that could have saved them from doing the horrific things that they did. Because when men don't have purposes, or men don't have a purpose, there's a good chance that they become angry, they become bitter, and they become resentful towards the world. And I was on that path. That's why I was so depressed, because I was trying to fight all this anger and this resentment that I was projecting onto the world. But really, it was just towards myself, because I didn't have a purpose.
Amazing again, mate. Couple questions before we wrap up today's show, my friend. So if there is somebody who is of belief that they may be emotionally eating, what would be your questions and best advice that you would ask and tell them?
Yeah. Number 1 would be, like I said before, what are you excited about in your life right now? If you can't answer that question, not just with one thing, with multiple things, being honest about it, that's your problem. You need to create something exciting in your life. So whether that's booking a trip away to work towards, whether that's arranging an exciting date night with your partner, whether that's joining a club, getting a hobby, doing something that's fun, just have fun, basically. Just pick something that's fun and do more of it. Yeah, that's the first thing. The other thing I would ask, again, do you like your job? Yes or no? Because unfortunately, I've had clients who work with me a while, and I've said to them, I've had this conversation, if you don't create an exit plan for this job, you're not going to reach your goals. And I'm going to stand here as your coach and say, this is not on me. This is on you and your inability to take action on the fact that this job is depressing you. I can't help you unless you get yourself out of this environment. You hate your job. You absolutely despise it. I don't think you can ever improve your mental health if you've got to force yourself to do things you hate 40 hours a week. I just couldn't do it, mate. I'll hold my hands up. Might sound a bit dramatic here. I'd rather be dead than have a 40-hour week job that I hated. I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So those 2 things. If you hate your job, you're not going to have a meaningful purpose. And if you're not excited about anything in your life that you've got to look forward to in the future, that's why you're just stuck in this. Is this it? Is this my life? I'm bored. I'm frustrated. And that's when all the other things will manifest. So have some things to do that you can look forward to. Have a sense of purpose. Get amongst other people who are on the same journey as you. Make connections that feel intimate and safe. And yeah, have a look at your job. Maybe you do hate your job. Maybe you can learn to love it though, if you do those other things. So many people I've worked with have said, yes, I hate my job. I'm like, right, well, let's not have a knee-jerk reaction and quit your job because you need that, right? I get it. Paying the bills, you've got kids. It's a bit unrealistic for me to just say, quit your job. I totally get that. But let's look at those other stuff first. You might start enjoying your job if you actually have things to do outside of your job. So sometimes I find that solves the problem of the job, and you can kind of learn to get away with it. Say, well, whatever, I've got my job. I don't particularly like it, but I'm really looking forward to those things outside of work, and I can't wait. It makes your job go a little bit easier. But if that's all you've got nothing outside, and you hate your job, you are on a desperate path, I'm afraid.
So office work, I've got to ask something that's relevant. Viral. Cakes in the office. Where are you at with that?
Yeah, to be honest, I think it's I think we live in a clickbait society, and I generally think that headline was just about getting clicks and
100%.
pushing some kind of revenue towards some kind of advert that was on that link. That's the thing that it seems to make us utterly moronic information, you know. But yeah, we live in a world of, you know, double think. I don't know if you've ever studied George Orwell in his terms, but governments and institutions will put out conflicting information that don't make sense, that'll get people to have one belief, but then, oh, well, I must believe that one because that's true, you know. So it's a form of emotional gaslighting that you see from society these days, just to confuse people. I think, you know, I'm going down the conspiracy rabbit hole here, but you'll probably agree there's definitely an agenda to dumb people down and keep them stuck, miserable, not critically thinking, so they go along with any old crap that the governments want to give us, you know. So I think that is just a manifestation of it. That's just a microcosm. Or cakes in the office, he makes other people overweight. So people will focus on that, but they'll not focus on all these other stuff that's depressing them and making them have issues and addictions. They just want to emotionally gaslight people, and that's where these extreme headlines come from, just to confuse people. They'll just put shit information out there and see how many people fall for it, basically.
Mate, literally nail on head. I believe that could be a Sam Gibson episode part 2, where we talk about misinformation.
Oh, mate, don't get started. Yeah.
Anyway, mate, my final question for you today is: you've spoken about having a purpose, you've spoke about having exciting goals. Where are you heading towards in 2023, my man?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, so the reason that all this information I've talked about today, the 7 areas of disconnect, the reason that's fresh on my mind is because I actually delivered this at a speaking gig last week.
Insane,
I've been doing
mate.
speaking gigs. That's my second one, and I loved it. And I do believe that is the path that I want to take. You know, so as much as I love coaching, I think long term, I'd like to see myself on stage delivering these kinds of talks in front of thousands of people. I think that's what's next for me. So I need to do what I need to do to become that guy. So I guess that's what my higher level purpose is. But for now, it's just getting my clients the best results possible and living life on my terms in the form of my hobbies. You know, I love traveling. I want to get away a few times this year. I want to do some fun things, meaningful experiences. That's pretty much it. You know, as long as I tick those boxes, I know I'll be okay. And whatever life throws at me in the form of family problems, stressful situations, whatever life has in store for me, I know if those 2 boxes are ticked, my purpose, helping clients, helping people, educating people, living by my values, my personal hobbies, I'll be fine. I believe that.
Beautiful end, mate. This podcast has genuinely banged, mate. I appreciate your time. I can genuinely go away from this podcast and say that I've learned something, A, about you, which is important, and B, I've learned something which I can now take to assist my clients as well, man. And that's a powerful position for you to be in.
Yeah.
So, Sam, if people have loved listening to you today, where can they come and find you on social media?
Yeah, Instagram, Sam Gibson Limitless, I believe my handle is. And then if you type on Facebook, Sam Gibson Emotional Eating Coach, you'll probably be able to see me on there. Yeah, so Facebook and Instagram. I do have some free resources as well, which if you go on my website, samgibsonlimitless.co.uk, you'll be able to download my free audiobook, which has had about 15,000 downloads over the last 2 years, which is just my tips and tricks on how to help people spot their root causes for their emotional eating habits. So that's the best place to catch me.
If you send me the link over, mate, I will drop it into the podcast bio. And I always ask this question, mate. Have you enjoyed your experience on the Grassroots Guy podcast?
Yes, it's absolutely flew. I can't believe we've been on an hour. I could do this for another 5 hours, mate. I can talk.
Yeah, so could I.
Talk the back legs off a donkey. Yeah,
mate. I genuinely have really enjoyed this episode, which is episode number 78, and I promise you that you will be on again this year if it's something you're up for.
Let's do it, mate. Let's do it.
Insane. So as I just said, this has been episode 78 of the Grassroots Guy podcast with me, your host, Harry Purdy, and today's guest, Sam Gibson, who is a world-class expert on emotional eating. Please do go check him out. If you have enjoyed today's episode, please pop over to Spotify and Apple Podcasts and drop this episode a 5-star review. It does go a long, long way to help on the show. And even if you want to drop it on a story on Instagram or Facebook, that would also help massively. You will catch me with a new episode here every Friday. Take care.